Horticultural therapy and the therapeutic benefits of garden environments have been documented since ancient times. In the 1940s and 1950s, the work done with hospitalized war veterans significantly expanded the practice. Today it is widely used in assisting participants in learning new skills or regaining those that are lost. Horticultural therapy helps improve memory, cognitive abilities, and socialization, as well as strengthening muscles and improving coordination, balance, and endurance. Today we visit A.G. Rhodes in Atlanta, Georgia. It is one of Atlanta's oldest nonprofits and has set the gold standard for therapy and rehabilitation services. Their staff is comprised of seasoned professionals who are experts in a wide range of therapy disciplines. One of their brightest is Kirk Hines, who has been practicing horticultural therapy for 24 years. He was captivated by the art of gardening in containers and learned firsthand the incredible therapeutic value of time in the garden with plants. And when he set off to Berry College, he knew that he wanted to pursue a blend of horticulture and psychology. Kurt has never looked back, and today he heads up the horticultural therapy program on the beautiful campus of A.G. Rhodes. And today he'll be sharing with us his decades of experience in this fascinating and cutting-edge field of health and gardening. Kurt, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Welcome to A.G. Rhodes.
Kurt, you have one of these really unusual occupations. In fact, this is the first show that we've ever shot on horticultural therapy, and I'd love to know how you found yourself in this occupation.
It's something that I was exposed to at Berry College. I started out in psychology, and I think my love of bonsai is what led me closer to horticulture. So I wanted to pursue horticulture as my major. As I started that, I was exposed to the field of horticultural therapy by my professors, and fortunately Berry allowed them to sculpt and craft my curriculum so that it matched other universities' degree in horticultural therapy. And from there I did my internship, finished that up, and came to Atlanta and started practicing.
So if I walked in through the front door and said, Kurt, I would like to be involved in horticultural therapy, what would that look like? What would I be signing up for?
I would grab you and drag you into the greenhouse and swiftly make you start propagating. I work with patients on a daily basis in groups, individuals. We work in the greenhouse, we work at the tables, at the bedside even, depending on the patient's needs. All that's assessed, and then I develop some type of horticultural task that will address and meet those needs.
Kurt, you mentioned that your average client is an elderly person, maybe ones with health impairments, but what are some of the benefits for younger people?
I think it's very appropriate with adolescents, children. I think getting them involved into the garden oftentimes helps them work on activity level, obesity, gets them away from video games, right? It also is if you have children growing vegetables, they're more likely to taste them, improving their nutrition. With younger adults even working on activity level, stress reduction, as well as more of the medical diagnoses if you were working with a younger adult in the hospital, regaining function after an injury or an illness. Most of my clients are geriatric patients, so older adults. At A.G. Rhodes we have individuals who live with us in long-term care, but we also have people who come in for rehab after an accident, injury, stroke, heart surgery.
So if one was wanting to find a practice that offered these services, where would you look?
I think one of the best locations would be our national association, going to the American Horticultural Therapy Association website, and they would be able to help you locate services and horticultural therapists in your area. We are a little spread out. There's probably less than 300 in the country.
Okay. So they're a little tricky to find, but you can probably find a city that offers it.
You can. It's a unique service for A.G. Rhodes in Atlanta.
Great. As a lifelong gardener, I certainly know anecdotally about that sense of stress relief and peace that I feel when I walk into a beautiful conservatory or walk through a garden. But what is it from a medical standpoint that's actually happening to us? Why do we feel that way when we're around plants?
Our brains are hardwired to respond to the color green. And being in a lush green environment allows us to relax, recover from stress. All of that factors into the healing process. So when you're exposed to plant materials, like in this greenhouse, your heart rate starts to lower, your respiration rate starts to lower, your galvanic response, the electrical impulses across your skin starts to slow down a little. And all of this factors into you feeling better.
And beyond that, there's also the act of gardening itself.
Right.
Like one of my favorite things to do is just lose myself in a pruning job or even cultivating a new bed. And there's something to that activity as well, right?
Right, absolutely. It's non-threatening. It's something that is familiar for most people. A lot of people have gardened, even if it's keeping an African violet on a windowsill. So when you break it down, you're looking also at the physical movements. You're standing, you're reaching, you're doing all of these things that can be translated into rehabilitation goals, as well as the thought processes, planning, naming, sequencing, all of those things.
And there's a psychological impact as well. I know for myself, when I've spent all of that time on this section of the garden, or say a specific bonsai plant, and seeing the maturation of it, and it's something that really gives us a great sense of success and accomplishment.
Right, and improves and boosts your self-esteem. So if you're working with issues related to depression, those types of, getting that activity level, but also working on something perhaps with other people as well. Boosting your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-value, all of that benefits.
From a physiological standpoint, there's a little bit of physical extraneousness that goes into gardening, but one can take it at their own pace. So
absolutely,
regardless of where they are, there are all these different kinds of tasks that can be assigned to someone so that they're also rebuilding certain muscles.
Absolutely. So as a horticultural therapist, after assessing those needs, you can take a task, perhaps like very simple plant propagation, taking cuttings and potting soil, and depending on your cognitive abilities or your physical abilities, we're able to break those down into single-step tasks. You can take 1 scoop of soil, fill up a small pot, that's one step, and then taking a cutting, place it in the soil, that's another step.
What are some of the plants that you like to work with and the ones that you find to be most impactful with this kind of therapy?
I think the ones that are most successful with my patients. Not everyone's going to be a horticulturalist. Not everyone's going to have a greenhouse. So what will be best for their living situation? So we'll talk about if they have sun or shade or a windowsill or an outdoor garden, and then we'll propagate begonias. We'll propagate all types of tropicals like the philodendrons and even bonsai material, some of the tropical trees. And, but mostly finding something that they're going to be comfortable and successful with.
We've talked a bit about the psychological and the physiological benefits of horticultural therapy. I'd like us now to dive into the nuts and bolts of what an average session with you looks like.
Okay. Well, again, it's highly tailored to the individual, so it's hard to have an average session.
Right.
But once needs are determined, then I'll design a task that meets the needs of the patients. So perhaps if we divide it up into 2 categories, if I'm working with a patient perhaps dealing with depression or feelings of isolation, we would work together with others at a group setting and work with plant materials that increase their activity level, increase their involvement, perhaps reintegrate them into a past leisure interest. If they've been ill or injured, they perhaps have given up things that they've enjoyed, and that can lead to depression. Another patient perhaps that's dealing with a hip fracture. We're working on standing, strengthening, mobility, and working at raised beds or walking through a garden is something that accomplishes that.
And so this could cover the entire range of all the different types of gardening activities, whether it's pruning, planting, even aspects of design?
It could, and it can be adapted to meet those needs, just the same way a garden space is adapted. So for a patient who's working with mobility, we have steps that they can take. Perhaps if they're discharging home and they have 3 steps in order to enter their home, they can practice while they're here in the garden. We have handrails, we have seating, there's areas for shade. Also, even things like the tinting on the walkway helps to decrease glare, because if you have glaucoma or cataracts, the glare from concrete can be very uncomfortable. As they're moving through the garden, there are things that help distract them from pain, help to draw them through the garden, such as blueberries that they can taste. You know, hey, let's go look around the bend and walk just a little farther. And all of that ends up increasing their strength and endurance and allowing them to get better and go home.
And does that change much throughout the seasons? I'm sure the type of activities naturally would.
It does. We can work throughout the year. Perhaps if it's too cold or raining out in the courtyard areas or the garden areas, we can go into the horticultural therapy greenhouse. Or if we're working with perhaps more reintegration into leisure interests or increasing socialization, we'll work at a table, and we'll work together taking cuttings, propagation, working on plant materials for sensory stim. If you're working with someone with Alzheimer's disease or severely cognitively impaired, even touching and smelling helps them to engage.
You know, that's one of the amazing things about gardening is there's this incredible range of diversity of activities, and so I'm sure
Absolutely.
that your patients rarely get bored.
I hope not. I hope not. I try not to be boring.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to do every season, and there's a way to bring that seasonal interest. It's a way to connect also and to feel oriented to the time of year. If you've been in the hospital for a very long time, you lose track. It's always, 75 degrees. So going outside or having plant materials brought in orients you to the season, the day, the time, all of those types of things.
Good garden design certainly takes into account the utilization of the space. How are people going to experience it? And that's different from garden to garden. And this is a very unique situation here. I'd like for you to talk about the garden design and what you had to take into consideration when you put this together.
Good horticultural therapy or therapeutic garden design is population specific. So whom does the garden serve? In this particular setting, it's serving the geriatric population that's here for subacute rehabilitation. This garden was designed primarily for mobility, working on walking skills, range of motion, strengthening endurance. So as you go through this garden, you'll notice that there are handrails, there's access to seating at intervals, there's shade, raised beds so that you can work from a wheelchair or standing, and then other things as well, like the plant materials selected to engage all of your senses while you're moving through the garden.
Yeah, and so you see these fragrant plants, you see edible plants. There are plants that offer great opportunities for pruning and even some really neat fruit trees.
It is, yeah. We grow calamundan oranges, and while you're picking them, you're standing, you're reaching, you're using fine and gross motor skills. And then we take what we grow, our tomatoes, our oranges, all types of things, into our rehabilitation kitchen, and we can work on life skills that need to be assessed so that when a patient goes home, we know that they'll be safe.
I noticed a lot of raised beds and even some really interesting ones that are up on legs. I'm assuming that's for a client who may be in a wheelchair that needs a raised access?
It is, and also for standing endurance. We'll have someone stand and time them so that we can track progress. If they're in a wheelchair, then you want a raised bed that can come right into the wheelchair coming into the bed and be able to reach and access the plant materials.
You've also put a lot of focus on this being an aesthetically beautiful garden. There's a lot of color here, and it's not just this functional utilitarian place. It's also a place of respite, and it's very peaceful and beautiful.
Well, pretty counts.
It does.
You want to go into a garden and feel good because the plant materials are healthy, they're lush, they're fragrant and engaging.
Right. And so for you as a gardener, that's a lot of the emotional benefit that you're talking about. Also for your patients to come in here and feel like this is an oasis in this big city.
It is, and those are some of the theories behind horticultural therapy. Going out into a natural space allows our bodies to rest, recover, and almost have a little mini vacation from a lot of stressors.
Kurt, for our viewers who might have a small patio that they want to convert into an area where they can take part in horticultural therapy, or maybe for someone who has an existing garden and they'd like to know how they could creatively start integrating these principles and these kind of designs, what advice would you have for them?
I'd say first off, consider your interests. Consider what you enjoy doing with the garden, whether it be vegetables, herbs, sun, shade. Do you have a courtyard area or a patio that you'd like to work on? How can it also be set up so that you can enjoy it lifelong? How can you age in place? I would say one of the best things to do is make it enabling. Make it easy to access. Raised beds, large containers, smooth surfaces, areas where you can sit down and have a little shade, areas that have access to water. So having it easy within reach so that you'll want to go out and garden and work with your plants and not have it become an impossible labor, even as you age.
Right, I think that's a very important tip, that we should look for things that are not, at least initially, very maintenance intensive. Right. I think that's one of the things that bogs down young gardeners or folks that are new to gardening, because you've created essentially a monster and it becomes too difficult to maintain. And then also looking for the kinds of plants that are easier to grow.
Absolutely. Do your research, read up on it. I think a lot of people have those childhood memories of having grandmother make them pull weeds. And they think that's what their garden space is going to be, and that's not it. With raised beds and containers, you're making it easy. You're not pulling a lot of weeds. You're not really killing yourself, hurting your back, injuring your knees. And it's something that you can do when you're 103.
A very important component of your job, Kurt, is making gardening accessible to people that might have a limited range of motion, may not be as strong as other gardeners.
Absolutely.
And one thing that's super important there is selecting the right tool for the job, right?
It is. That's part of the assessment process. You see where a patient may need assistance if adapted equipment is needed. And there are, fortunately these days, equipment that's specifically made for gardening to meet those needs. One of the best things you can do is to have good, smart setup, soft soil, raised beds or large containers that make the process easier. But if you have loss of function or weakness perhaps in an arm or your hands, then there are some wonderful tools to use.
Now, well, let's go through some of these that you have, because many of these are tools that I've never seen before.
Right. They may look a little different, but for instance, you may have trowels or something that you can use as a hoe that fits on your arm with this brace, allows you to hold on to the handle, and that way you can use that arm motion to make holes in the raised bed or the container. Some very lightweight tools are made out of plastic. This one has an ergonomic handle. If you have limited wrist flexion, you're able to dig in the soil. This is just lightweight. Makes it much easier if you have loss of strength and aren't able to pick things up. Light plastic tools are durable, but they can also be easier to handle. We have tools that have the trigger grips. That makes it just a little easier to hold on to.
Right.
If you have arthritis, it's tough holding smaller handles like that. Things that you can perhaps cut flowers or even light pruning. These are cutter gatherers that allow you to make a cut and then hold on to what you've cut, bringing it back to you. So it doesn't just cut it off and have it fall on the ground. You may have trouble then bending over to pick it up. So it makes it much easier. Tools that have extensions. That way, if you're sitting in a chair or a wheelchair, you can extend them to any length to accommodate your arms. Those are pretty handy. Some have interchangeable tools at the end.
Wow. And there are a lot of things that we can find just around the home or in retail garden centers and shops. There's a lot of focus of late that's being put into the ergonomics of tools.
Absolutely.
And how that takes some of the impact out of the joints.
Right.
And makes it more comfortable to garden.
Absolutely.
You know, here are a few here that I think are great examples of ergonomic tools. Instead of the straight handles, you know, these really nice handles that utilize all the strength of the hand.
Yep.
This is a basic scraper, and especially if we're dealing with soil that's already somewhat loose, it's an easy way to weed, also to allow the
Cultivate
roots.
your soil there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, with the curved design, if you have limited wrist flexion or arthritis, it makes it a little easier on those joints.
This is a weeder that I like to use, same kind of ergonomic design, and I love the way that this is shaped. So you know, especially if you're weeding things like dandelions, that it's hard to get rid of that taproot.
Right.
In fact, if you don't excise the entire taproot, you're simply making more
dealing
little
with
baby
it again.
dandelions.
Right.
And so this is a really easy tool. Penetrates down to the ground. You're able to extract the entire root. I also like, you know, just a basic scoop for gardening. If you're moving soil into containers, it's not as big as a shovel, you know, but it's also not as small as a trowel. And so it's a really good universal tool. Once again, this great ergonomic design. It's a very comfortable handle, so you can work with it for hours without any fatigue.
Right, absolutely. There's also some very easy things you can do at home. If you don't happen to have an adapted piece of equipment, taking a standard trowel like you'd find, taking a little bit of plumbing insulation, cut it, wrap the handle, maybe a little duct tape that holds the world together.
Absolutely.
And you have a built-up handle that makes it much easier to hold on to. I also use these very inexpensive, these are kids' boards for surf, and they're great for kneeling pads if you're working, you know, down on the ground. It's easier on your knees. So.
That's wonderful. Well, Kirk, thank you so much for sharing this. It's been so much fun spending the day with you and exploring a topic that we've never explored on GardenSMART.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're really happy to have you here, and please come back.
We learned so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
DRAM is celebrating 75 years of design and manufacturing of quality watering tools. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
Bring the outdoors into your everyday life. Bass Pro Shops can outfit all your adventures, even those in your backyard. Bass Pro Shops, your adventure starts here.
Cleaning our air, offering cool shade and beauty. Trees work hard in your yard and deserve your care. Bayer Advanced, makers of products designed to revitalize and protect. Get more from the blue bottle.
Hey there, little Red Riding Hood. You sure are get good.
Today, Kirk's given us a behind-the-scenes look at the healing power of plants through horticultural therapy. We've also picked up some great tips on how we can apply these principles at home. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. Remember, even if you're a master gardener, there's always more to learn. So join us next week for more great gardening tips and ideas as we garden smart.